The devastating geopolitical consequence of Putin's war against Ukraine is the accelerated collapse of Russia's imperial influence across its traditional sphere of control. The Kremlin is preoccupied with a war of choice, and that distraction has created an immediate vacuum across Central Asia, a vacuum that the United States and China are now ruthlessly filling. The former Russian periphery, once treated as a collection of loyal vassals, is now actively and openly reorienting toward new, more powerful patrons. This is FPV Explainer, where we break down the most fascinating stories in drone warfare, global affairs, and U.S. domestic politics. If you're enjoying this deep dive, hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us what topic you want to see next. Your feedback shapes our future videos and keeps us bringing you clear, detailed analysis from the front lines. Also, please watch this video to the very end, even if you play it in the background without sound, as your continuous viewing is critical to help promote the truth about the war. The most symbolic and strategically critical indicator of this pivot was the summit of the C5+1 format held in Washington, D.C. For the leaders of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan, attending such a high-level meeting without Moscow's participation was, until recently, unthinkable. Yet the invitation from Trump was accepted, marking a decisive shift in regional priorities. The event was not merely a diplomatic gesture, it was a public declaration of independence from Russia's orbit, confirming that these nations no longer view the Kremlin as the indispensable strategic power. The immediate consequences of this reorientation are deeply economic and technological, targeting the very sectors where Russia once held a dominant hand. Uzbekistan, for instance, negotiated an unprecedented $100 billion investment package from the U.S. over a decade, with funds aimed at strategic American sectors like mining rare earth minerals and aerospace manufacturing. Kazakhstan, long considered Russia's closest partner, granted American access to its strategic wolfram deposits and committed $2 billion to purchase advanced NVIDIA chips for developing artificial intelligence cutting-edge technology that Russia simply cannot offer. Furthermore, the republics collectively signaled a move away from the Russian aerospace industry by committing to purchase nearly 40 Boeing aircraft, replacing older Soviet-era fleets and delivering a structural blow to Russia's struggling manufacturing base. This wave of multi-billion-dollar high-tech deals highlights the core reason for Russia's loss of influence: economic inferiority. Moscow, burdened by sanctions and a collapsing budget, cannot compete with the sheer financial might of Beijing or Washington. China has already surpassed Russia as the main trading partner for Central Asia, and now the U.S. is rapidly increasing its economic footprint, actively displacing Russian influence in key sectors like aviation, agriculture, and high-value resource extraction. The strategic calculation of Central Asian leaders is clear: the instability of Putin's regime and the economic opportunity presented by the West have made Moscow's patronage expendable.
We have analyzed the systemic retreat of Russian influence in Central Asia. Now we turn to the second and most immediate geopolitical catastrophe for the Kremlin: the wholesale collapse of its authority in the South Caucasus, a region where Russia had long claimed the undisputed role of the essential military arbiter. This failure is a direct consequence of Putin's preoccupation with the war in Ukraine, which provided the perfect opening for the U.S. to seize control of the peace process and secure crucial strategic corridors. The core reason for this sudden collapse was the betrayal of Armenia. Moscow's political and military guarantees to its long-standing ally, Armenia, were exposed as utterly worthless. When Azerbaijan decisively moved to reclaim control of the Nagorno-Karabakh region, Russian peacekeepers, who were strategically deployed as the presumed guarantors of the armistice, stood idly by. This military inaction and political paralysis were widely and correctly interpreted in Yerevan as an act of profound strategic abandonment. Armenian leadership publicly declared that relying on Moscow for security had been a catastrophic mistake, effectively invalidating Russia's entire security architecture in the region. This vacuum of power was instantly filled by the United States. While Moscow was distracted and economically constrained, Washington seized the initiative to broker the final critical peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia. This diplomatic success was a direct public humiliation for Putin. The U.S. successfully engineered a joint declaration of peace and acted as the guarantor of the new arrangements, completely displacing Russia as the primary mediator in a region where it had been the dominant external power for 2 centuries. The strategic consequences of this U.S. intervention are massive and enduring. The final peace agreement included provisions for a crucial strategic corridor connecting Azerbaijan with its exclave, Nakhchivan. This passage, now explicitly designated the Trump route, is a powerful symbol of the new geopolitical reality. The U.S. secured control over the development and operation of this vital transit route through southern Armenia, a corridor that will strategically bypass Russian and Iranian territory. This effectively cuts Moscow out of the transit and trade architecture of the South Caucasus, a resource Russia had long coveted. The loss of the South Caucasus is a complete strategic checkmate. Russia's influence is now effectively terminated in the region. Its peacekeeping forces have been withdrawn, its military bases lack political support, and its former allies are openly pursuing security agreements with NATO and the U.S. The speed and completeness of this collapse confirm that the war in Ukraine has not only consumed Russia's military reserves, but also destroyed its strategic credibility, paving the way for Washington and Ankara to dominate the future of the region.
We have analyzed the collapse of Russian influence in Central Asia and the Caucasus. Now we confront the stark evidence that the war in Ukraine has shattered the last crucial pillar of Russia's global power projection, the irrevocable loss of Syria. This is a geopolitical defeat of monumental scale, confirming that Putin's strategy to restore great power status in the Middle East has been consumed entirely by his failed war of choice. The centerpiece of Russia's entire Middle Eastern strategy for the past decade was Bashar al-Assad. The 2015 military intervention, which successfully rescued the regime, was meant to be the ultimate proof of Russian reliability and global influence, securing naval and air bases on the Mediterranean. However, this entire geopolitical structure collapsed in late 2024 with the swift, unexpected fall and flight of the Assad regime. This event was a direct consequence of Putin's preoccupation. While Moscow's resources and attention were entirely consumed by the war in Ukraine, the intricate balance of power and internal stability in Syria unraveled, leading to the collapse of the very proxy Moscow had invested billions in saving. The aftermath was a scene of strategic humiliation for Moscow. The entire Near East strategy has been functionally terminated. The immediate priority for the Russian military was not to fight for the new regime, but to execute a humiliating partial evacuation of its most valuable equipment and personnel. Eyewitness accounts confirmed massive transport planes arriving at Kremlin Air Base to load up armor and sensitive gear. Russian forces, once seen as saviors, were reduced to protecting only their 2 remaining bases, Kremlin and Tartus, which now function as hostages rather than strategic strongholds. The political reality facing Putin is that his bases remain in Syria without guarantee. The new transitional Syrian government, which quickly shifted to open dialogue with the U.S. and regional rivals, is under no legal or political obligation to honor the long-term lease agreements signed by the deposed Assad regime. Russia has been forced into immediate, desperate negotiations to plead for the continued presence of its forces. This loss of control means that the strategic value of the Russian bases, the only viable military foothold outside the former Soviet space, has plummeted. They are no longer pillars of regional influence. They are highly vulnerable diplomatic chips that the new Syrian leadership can play at any time. Furthermore, the loss of Syria represents a devastating victory for Russia's geopolitical rivals. The U.S. quickly embraced the new Syrian leadership, promising aid and political support, rapidly working to fill the strategic vacuum left by Russia's retreat. Regional powers like Turkey now have greater freedom to maneuver. The final verdict is clear. Putin's military adventure in Ukraine not only consumed his resources, but actively destroyed his carefully constructed alliances in the Middle East. He sacrificed his global influence for a failing war of aggression, leaving his entire decade-long strategic ambition in ruins.
We have analyzed the catastrophic loss of influence in the Caucasus and the Middle East. Now, we confront the most urgent and politically volatile strategic failure for the Kremlin, the undeniable defection of its closest and final loyal ally, Belarus. This is not a geopolitical abstraction. It is a nightmare scenario for Putin, proving that his war of aggression is actively driving his last remaining vassal state into the arms of the West. The foundation of this crisis is the war's systemic exhaustion of Russian power. The Belarusian leader, a notorious political survivor, has correctly calculated that Russia is a failing patron. Consequently, he has initiated a cautious but distinct strategic drift toward the West. This pivot is not secret. It is confirmed by unprecedented diplomatic activity. After years of complete isolation under severe U.S. and EU sanctions, the Belarusian leader is now engaged in direct, high-level dialogue with Donald Trump. This conversation, which would have been politically unthinkable just months prior, was immediately followed by a series of political concessions by Minsk. The strategy is clear. The Belarusian leader is trading political prisoners for economic relief. He has publicly announced the release and pardon of dozens of political prisoners, many of whom were immediately expelled to Europe and the U.S. This humanitarian gesture was followed by immediate and targeted sanctions relief from the Treasury Department, which partially lifted restrictions on the national airline, Belavia. This demonstrates a transactional arrangement. The West is actively and successfully prying Belarus away from Moscow's orbit by offering tangible economic rewards for political distancing. For the Kremlin, this situation is a strategic catastrophe. Belarus is more than just a partner. It is the final military buffer zone protecting Russia's western flank and a vital logistical corridor. Putin has invested massive financial and political capital into maintaining control over Minsk, financing the leader's repressive regime in exchange for strategic subordination and the use of Belarusian territory in the war against Ukraine. The sight of his last loyal partner openly seeking sanctions relief and dialogue with the very American leader who is tightening the financial noose on Russian oil exports is a profound humiliation. It proves that the cost of aligning with Russia has become so high that even the most reliant autocrat is desperate for an alternative. This defection signals to the entire post-Soviet space that Russian guarantees are worthless, and it underscores the failure of Putin's political ambition to create a unified, Russian-dominated Union state.
We have meticulously analyzed the collapse of influence across Central Asia, the Caucasus, and the loss of Syria, culminating in the strategic defection of Belarus. The final, inescapable verdict on Putin's aggression is that the war in Ukraine has become the ultimate, self-inflicted engine of imperial collapse,
fundamentally dismantling Russia's multi-generational sphere of influence and creating an irreversible ring of adversaries and rivals aligned with Washington and Beijing. The initial goal of the aggression was to seize Ukraine and push NATO back, yet the actual result is a complete strategic checkmate. The war has consumed Russia's military and financial capacity, forcing its allies to look elsewhere for security. In the Caucasus, the betrayal of Armenia eliminated Russia as a credible military arbiter, immediately allowing the United States to seize control of the peace process and strategic transit corridors. In Central Asia, nations are signing multi-billion-dollar deals for technology and resources with the U.S. and China, proving that Russian economic patronage is obsolete. Even in the Middle East, the collapse of the Assad regime has rendered Russia's massive investment in naval and air bases functionally worthless. This geopolitical isolation is the most profound strategic defeat. Russia is no longer a major, reliable center of power. It is an exhausted, isolated power that is now forced into a humiliating position of trading its last remaining influence for minimal concessions. The perfect example is the relationship with Viktor Orban in Hungary. To maintain its foothold in the European energy market, the Kremlin is forced to offer massive concessions to Orban, including the purchase of U.S. nuclear reactors and gas, a move that actively weakens Russia's energy chokehold on Central Europe. The entire system is caught in a self-defeating spiral. The military power Putin used to try and seize Ukraine has become the precise force that stripped him of everything else. The war effort, which consumes trillions of rubles and over 1 million casualties, has only achieved one permanent outcome: to surround Russia with nations that have unequivocally turned away from Moscow, choosing the stability, wealth, and security guarantees offered by its rivals. The only constant is that the collapse of the empire is accelerating with every day the war continues.